and it's going to get stronger. Russia's relations with the world are stronger than before. Not with the West. They've never been strong with the West.
Right.
My perception is that NATO is an institution that takes on because it's existed for so long, it's assumed an independent character, a personality that might be different from the personalities of its constituent nations. So NATO has this strategic objective of survival. Remember, this is an institution that needs to survive.
Yeah.
France doesn't need NATO to survive. England doesn't need NATO to survive. No nation needs NATO to survive. NATO needs NATO to survive. That's it. That's all there is. This is an organization that long ago lost a viable reason to exist. It only exists to please itself. It is literally the self-licking ice cream cone that now decided that we're going to make an issue of Ukraine. But there are 30 members of NATO, and NATO is a consensus-driven organization, and you need all 30 members to agree. And here's the weakness of NATO. NATO was using the Minsk Accords as a vehicle to buy time while NATO trained the Ukrainian army so that the Ukrainian army, acting as a proxy of NATO, could launch an offensive operation against the Donbass, occupy it, and then push Russia out of Crimea. This was the NATO plan all along. To use the Ukrainian military as a proxy army to attack Russia, so that Ukraine could be seized away from the Russian orbit once and for all. This is why, when this war, the special military operation started, and Vladimir Putin and his generals were saying, we have no choice but to attack now because the Ukrainians have amassed this massive force that are going to attack in the next couple of days or weeks, the Donbass. So we have to preempt their attack. That's why they cited Article 51, peremptory collective self-defense, authorized, under the United Nations Charter. Everybody went, oh, you're just making that up. That's just the Russians playing legal game. No, it's real. It's real. Yeah. Ukraine had massed around 100,000 troops, trained by NATO, equipped by NATO, led by officers operating under instructions from NATO, who were ready to attack the Donbass sometime in early March. So that's the reality of the situation. So NATO was always going to go to war against Russia, but not as NATO, using the Ukrainian army.
Yeah.
Now, the way they were going to pressure the Russians not to interfere with this was through economic means. Think about NATO and Europe, they bought into the American plan. They bought into the premise that even if Russia does attack Ukraine, it can't sustain this attack because we're going to hit Russia with everything we got economically. And the idea was the economy would collapse, the Russian people would rise up, would push out, and victory to the Ukraine, Slava Ukraina. There's a problem though, and it's called Russia. The Russians are smarter and better at doing this kind of stuff than we are. They're more focused. They're serious actors, and they were ready for the sanctions. And I don't need to get long story short. All we have to do is say the sanctions boomerang. It's not the Russian economy that's collapsing right now. No. It's the European economy.
Correct.
It's the American economy.
Yeah.
The ruble isn't rebel. The ruble's stronger than it has been in some time now, and it's going to get stronger. Russia's relations with the world are stronger than before. Not with the West. They've never been strong with the West. Not with the United States. Russia doesn't care. They divorced from us. They're now focused eastwards towards China. An alliance that's better than any alliance in the world, we're told, and apparently it is. Yeah. They have strong relationships with India, with the rest of the world. They're selling their oil. For an economy that's supposed to be collapsing, they had a $100 billion surplus last quarter. They're going to have a $150 billion surplus. I think Joe Biden would die for a surplus. Like he'd die for a surplus of $1. We're running a deficit economy that's it's on the verge of collapse right now. But this is a long way of setting up to your answer. Can NATO survive this? NATO as an institution is a byproduct of the political will of constituent members. They're going to have a meeting in the end of June this month. in Madrid. It's an interesting meeting because, let's talk about Germany for a second. Germany, who is going to not only spend 100 billion euro to revitalize their military, which any historian would say probably the dumbest idea in history, to allow the Germans to create a massive military tied to an expansionist foreign policy. 100 billion euro from what? What economy is going to generate this 100 billion euro? Because in addition to this, you brought up something interesting. The European community got together and they just had, I think last month, this wonderful meeting that they always have. They say, we're going to take advantage of this opportunity provided by the Russians, the divorce from Russian energy, and we're going to revitalize our commitment to green. We're going to commit 210 billion euro for a new energy strategy that'll free us from Russian energy by 2024. And because we're Europeans and we're so well-meaning, we're going to have renewables just jump up and expand. And we're well on the way to the green economy that we always wanted. Thank you, Russia, Slava Ukraina. It didn't work. It's not working. No. Germany right now is in a gas emergency. The German government has announced the alarm phase of the gas emergency. They're rationing energy. Their industries are going to shut down. And God bless the renewables, but they don't generate squat.
Yes,
and they can't generate squat. You can't build a green economy on anything other than a fully functioning carbon economy. You need a carbon economy that's working on all cylinders, that has enough buffer that you can then begin to replace. But everything's got to be functioning. The carbon economy is collapsing in Germany right now. They've got to bring more carbon in. They've got to fire up the coal plants. They don't have any nuclear plants to fire up because they shut them down. The Germans are going down for the count. It's the death button. This is the reality that we're in right now. And so NATO now is going to sit there and try and have these plans, such as they want to spend tens of billions of dollars injecting new military capacity to the East. Who's going to pay for that? The United States is not going to pay for that. And while a lot of nations claim they want to have American troops, they got to understand that you got to pay for that. That we're not paying for it. That if you want an American division on Polish soil, the Polish government is going to have to front up the tens of billions of dollars necessary to build the infrastructure that brings them in. And then they're going to have to sustain that payment because the American taxpayer isn't going to underwrite the cost of putting American troops in Europe anymore. And they're going to have to sign status of forces agreements that are pretty tough for most sovereign nations to want to sign, such as you don't get to prosecute American soldiers when they do stupid things like rape your women. And that's an extreme one. Maybe they'd make an exception for that, but not really. I mean, we put status of forces agreement that makes American troops virtually untouchable by the host nation. So nobody's willing to do that right now, to have that conversation. So we have troops in Poland, but they're there temporarily. The 82nd Airborne Division, I think we have an armor brigade floating around there somewhere, a striker brigade, but they're not there permanently. At some point, they'll have to be withdrawn. But so NATO's going to have this conversation about restructuring. All these nations are going to be asked to invest more money. Well, how do you invest more money when your economy is literally collapsing? Europe right now is in survival mode. The thing Americans are worried about is the economy. It's the fact that back in January, it took me $30 to fill up my gas tank. Today it cost me $65, and that number is only going up. It's the fact that everything costs more. I'm not receiving more money in my paycheck, but life is costing me 20%, 25% more, which means that I can do less. Americans aren't happy about that. No one's happy about it, but we have it so much better than the Europeans. The Europeans are literally going to return to the Stone Age by the time winter rolls around. So, I mean, they'll be burning wood stoves to stay warm. NATO doesn't have the will because NATO as an institution thinks it has the will. Remember, they're the self-licking ice cream cone. They're just going to say, oh, we taste good, we taste good, we taste good. But the people holding it are looking at a melting ice cream cone, their hands getting dirty, and they're not, and they're just like, I don't want this anymore. I need to focus on myself and the people. And so the leaders that have bought into these policies, this failed economic war against Russia, this failed war against Russia and Ukraine, using Ukraine as a proxy, these are political leaders who are ultimately held accountable to their respective constituents. And the vast majority of these political leaders come from parliamentarian type systems. We're in the United States, we have Joe Biden for better or worse until he either dies, gets impeached, or is up for election in 2024. Ain't nothing going to change that in between. A parliamentary leader can be eliminated right now, today. And we just saw that in Bulgaria, where the parliament had a vote of no confidence, tossing out the pro-NATO, pro-EU, pro-US prime minister, and they're going to put somebody new in. And I bet you that somebody new is going to be more focused on figuring out how the hell do we get Russian gas back into Bulgaria before it's winter and we all freeze to death. That'll be his number one priority, not defending pipe dreams that coming out of Brussels about some grand NATO strategy to contain, control, and manipulate Russia using multiple levers of power and influence that cost money that we don't have. So I think this summer and this fall is going to be a time of political transition and transformation in Europe. We saw this in France. Macron won the presidential election, but he got crushed at the parliamentarian level, and now he has a far left prime minister, and you're going to see France become paralyzed politically. And it's going to be, so France is not going to be the leader that people want, even if France ever led the way that people want, because it's a very contrarian country. Germany, can Schultz survive the summer? Can his parliamentarian majority hold when everything is collapsing? Everything right now. When the industry shut down and they don't reopen, and the socialist state no longer has money available to pay the salaries of all the unemployed Germans, do you really think the Germans are going to be marching in the street saying, we want NATO? We want NATO. I think you're going to be saying the exact opposite. The British Prime Minister just suffered a recall election. He won narrowly, and it wasn't because of this issue. It was because he's a moron who parties during COVID. But when the British economy collapses, Finland and Sweden are both sitting there saying, we want to join NATO. We want to join NATO. When your economies collapse, suddenly NATO is not going to be as attractive as everybody thinks it is. I honestly believe that this coming NATO summit, when studied by historians, is going to be one of those seminal moments where they said, it's like when people look at the fall of the Roman Empire, it's very difficult for people to say, that's when the Roman Empire fell. No, I think that's when the Roman Empire fell. I think this coming NATO summit is going to be one of those moments where historians down the road go, that's when NATO fell right there. Now, that means NATO could last for decades. Sure. But NATO will never recover from this. NATO can never recover from this. It's over.